Welcome to Jolene's Stories, where a woman who gave everything finally reclaims it.
My name is Heidi Holland. I'm 45 years old. On a Tuesday morning in October, I sat in a bank manager's office in Columbus, Ohio, and watched security footage of my own sister forging my signature on a home equity line of credit worth $340,000. The pen she used was blue ink. She wrote my name slowly, carefully, the way someone practices in a mirror. She even paused to check something on her phone, probably a photo of my real signature, and then she finished the H with that same little curl I've used since nursing school. The bank manager kept glancing at me like he expected me to cry. I didn't cry. My hands went cold, and the room got very still, and something behind my sternum shifted like a lock turning in a door I didn't know I had. I want you to understand what happened in that room. But to understand it, you have to understand the 22 years that led me there. Welcome back to this channel. This is where we tell the stories that don't get told at family dinners, the ones that happen behind closed doors and inside bank statements, and at the bottom of credit reports no one checks because they trust the people they shouldn't. If this story sounds like something you've lived, go ahead and hit subscribe, drop a comment, let me know you're here. Now let me take you back to where this started. To understand how I ended up watching my sister forge my name on camera, you have to go back to a kitchen in Westerville, Ohio, in 2001, when I was 23 years old and believed that loving your family meant never saying no. I became a registered nurse at 22. Passed my boards on the first try, got hired at Ohio Health Riverside Methodist within 2 weeks, and the first paycheck I ever earned, the very first one, I split 3 ways. A third went to my parents' mortgage. A third went to my sister Jolene's car payment because she'd just had her first kid and her husband Todd was between jobs. And a third went to me. I remember standing at the kitchen counter of my parents' house, writing those checks by hand, and my mother Patricia watched me do it. She put her hand on my shoulder and said, "You're the strong one, Heidi. You always have been." I was 23. I didn't know yet that strong was a word people use when they mean useful. The house in Westerville was a split level with green shutters and a porch that sagged on the left side. My father had a bad back and hadn't been able to work steady since I was in high school. My mother worked part-time at a dry cleaner's, but the money was thin. So when I started earning, it felt natural. It felt like what you do. You come from a family where things are tight. You get a good job. You help. That's the deal. Nobody writes it down, but everybody knows it. I paid their mortgage, $2,800 a month. I set it up as an automatic transfer from my checking account directly into my parents' bank account, and my mother handled the bills from there. I trusted her with that, the way you trust the ground to be solid when you step on it. I never checked. I never asked for a receipt. Why would I? She was my mother. Jolene was 3 years younger than me and had married Todd Greer right out of high school. Todd was the kind of man who always had a plan that was about to work out. Landscaping company, car detailing business, real estate flip, always something, always next month, always, almost. Jolene loved him the way you love someone who makes you feel like the adventure is just around the corner. She had 2 kids with him before she was 25, and the car notes piled up, and I covered those too. $350 a month for the Honda, then $420 when she traded up to a Chevy Equinox, then $515 when the Equinox got totaled, and they financed a Kia Telluride that I still don't understand how they qualified for. Except now I do understand, because they used my credit to qualify. My brother Craig was the youngest. Craig had problems. That's what my mother always said, her voice dropping to that specific register reserved for things that are true, but also useful. Craig had problems. He'd been in and out of rehab since he was 19. Pills first, then harder things. And every 6 or 8 months my mother would call me, usually on a Wednesday, usually in the evening when I'd just gotten home from a 12-hour shift, and she'd say Craig needs help again. And I'd wire the money. $15,000 each time because that's what the facility cost. A 90-day program in Dayton. I sent that money 3 times in the last 6 years. $45,000 for my brother's recovery. I believed it because I needed to believe it, because the alternative was that my own family was lying to me about something that fundamental, and I wasn't ready to live in that world. Not yet. I married Mark Holland when I was 29. He was an electrician, steady and quiet, the kind of man who noticed when you were tired before you said anything. We bought a house in Clintonville, a small Cape Cod on a street lined with sugar maples, and we had Dylan. Mark never complained about the money I sent to my family. He'd look at the bank statement sometimes and get quiet, and I'd say, "It's just until they get on their feet," and he'd nod, and we'd move on. Mark was good at moving on. He was good at a lot of things I didn't appreciate until he was gone. Mark died of pancreatic cancer 14 months ago. Diagnosed in April, gone by September. 5 months. That's not enough time to say goodbye to someone you've built a life with. That's barely enough time to understand what's happening. I held his hand in the hospice room at Mount Carmel while the machines breathed for him, and Dylan sat in the hallway doing homework because he was 13 and didn't know how to be in that room, and I thought, at least I still have my family. At least I'm not alone. My mother came to the funeral. She wore a black dress and a diamond bracelet that caught the light every time she moved her wrist. I remember thinking it was beautiful. I didn't think about where it came from. I was burying my husband. After Mark died, I leaned harder into work. Double shifts at Riverside Methodist, plus my part-time work as a forensic billing auditor, which I'd started doing 3 years earlier because a colleague mentioned the certification, and I liked the precision of it. Nursing is instinct and compassion and thinking on your feet. Forensic billing is patterns. It's following the numbers until they tell you the truth. I was good at both, and I needed both, because staying busy meant I didn't have to sit in the house in Clintonville and listen to how quiet it was without Mark's boots by the door. Dylan kept me grounded. He's 14 now, tall for his age, with Mark's eyes and my stubbornness. He'd make me dinner some nights. Nothing fancy, pasta with jarred sauce, but he'd set the table with napkins folded into triangles because Mark used to do that. One evening in August, he looked at me across the table and said, "Mom, why does Aunt Jolene always call right before rent is due?" I laughed. I told him it was just coincidence, but I heard it. Kids see the patterns adults have trained themselves to ignore. On Sundays, I'd cook. That was my ritual, the one thing I kept from before. A big pot of something, chili or soup or beef stew, enough for the week. I'd stand at the stove with the windows open and NPR playing low, and for those few hours the world was just steam and spice and the sound of my own kitchen. My nursing license hung on the wall above the phone, in a black frame I'd bought at a craft fair in German Village the year I passed my boards. 20 years on that wall. It was the first thing I'd hung in every place I'd ever lived, before curtains, before art, before anything. That frame meant I had done something. I had earned something that was mine. I was going to need to remember that. The first crack came in September, a year and a month after Mark's funeral. I'd decided to refinance the Clintonville house. Interest rates were reasonable, and without Mark's income, I needed to lower the monthly payment. Straightforward. I sat down with a loan officer at Huntington Bank, a young man with a neat beard and a Columbus Crew coffee mug, and I gave him my social security number and waited while he pulled my file. He typed. He clicked. He typed some more. Then he stopped. He turned his monitor toward me, and what I saw made my hands go numb. My credit score had dropped 190 points. I said that can't be right. He said, "Let me show you what's here." 3 open lines of credit I had never authorized. 3. I sat very still in that chair while he scrolled through them, and I felt the air leave my lungs the way it does when you step into water that's colder than you expected. That night, I went home and pulled my full credit report for the first time in 3 years. 3 years. That's how long I'd been too busy, too grieving, too consumed with everyone else's emergencies to check the one document that tracks whether your financial identity still belongs to you. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee that went cold while I read, and by the time I finished, the coffee wasn't the only thing that had gone cold. $740,000 in debt attached to my name. 2 home equity lines of credit, both leveraged against properties I didn't own. A business credit line for a landscaping company called Green Edge Outdoor Solutions, which I had never heard of, and a car loan for a BMW X5 registered to my brother-in-law, Todd Greer. I read those numbers 3 times. My fingers left damp marks on the laptop keys. The house was silent except for the refrigerator humming and Dylan's music playing faintly upstairs, something with a soft beat. And I sat there in my kitchen in Clintonville and felt the floor dissolve beneath 22 years of trust. I called Jolene the next morning. I kept my voice level. I said there are accounts on my credit report that I didn't open. She was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted. Then she started crying. She said, "Todd borrowed your information. It was supposed to be temporary. He was going to pay it all back." I asked her how he got my social security number. She cried harder. I asked her again. She said Mom gave it to him. Then I asked the question that changed everything. I said, "Jolene, who co-signed the applications?" The crying stopped. Just stopped, like a faucet turning off. And in that silence, I heard the truth before she said it. She said I did. But Heidi, you have to understand. We were desperate. Todd's company needed capital, and I swear we were going to pay it back. She co-signed every fraudulent application, every single one. This was not Todd acting alone. This was not a desperate husband making a bad decision. This was coordinated. My sister sat in a bank or a lending office and put her name next to my forged name on documents that leveraged my credit, my identity, my financial life. And she did it more than once. I hung up the phone. I didn't say goodbye. I set the phone on the counter and looked at my nursing license on the wall, and for the first time it looked different to me. Not like an achievement, like a target. I started pulling threads. That's what forensic auditing is. You find one thread that doesn't belong and you pull it, gently, patiently, and you see what unravels. My mother had given me access to her bank accounts years ago, so I could help set up her bill pay system. She'd never revoked that access. She probably forgot I had it. Or maybe she assumed I'd never look, because the strong one doesn't question, the strong one just pays. I looked. The $2,800 I sent every month, the mortgage payment, landed in my parents' account on the 1st of each month like clockwork, and on the 2nd of each month, sometimes the same day, it was transferred out. Not to the mortgage company, to a joint account held by Jolene and my mother Patricia. Every month. For years. I scrolled back through the records. The pattern held all the way back to 2009. I looked up the mortgage separately. The house in Westerville had been paid off in 2009. The mortgage had been retired 15 years ago. 15 years of payments, $2,800 a month. That went nowhere near a mortgage. That's $504,000. I wrote that number on a piece of paper and I stared at it. $500,000. I'd earned that money on 12-hour shifts, on overnight codes, on holidays spent in scrubs instead of with my son. I earned it with my hands and my training and my back and my feet, standing in hospital rooms holding people's lives together while my own family took my money and funneled it into an account I didn't know existed. My stomach turned over. Not nausea. Something deeper. Something structural. Like discovering the house you've been living in has no foundation. Then I pulled the thread on Craig. I had records of the 3 wire transfers, $15,000 each, sent to the account my mother provided for the rehab facility in Dayton. I traced those transfers. They didn't go to Dayton. They went to a business account for Green Edge Outdoor Solutions, Todd's landscaping company. $45,000 I thought was saving my brother's life was funding my brother-in-law's business. I needed to know about Craig. I called my cousin Angela, my mother's sister's daughter, the one family member who had always existed slightly outside the inner circle. Angela picked up on the second ring. I said, "Angela, do you know where Craig is?" She said, "Heidi, Craig's been in Portland for 2 years. He's sober. He's been sober. He works as a carpenter." I said, "Are you sure?" She said, "I'm sure. I follow him on Instagram. He posted a picture of a deck he built last week." My brother was not in rehab. My brother had not been in rehab for the last 3 times I sent money. My family had used his addiction, his real and painful addiction that had caused real suffering, as a cover story. They weaponized his worst years to extract money from me. They turned my love for my brother into a billing mechanism. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. The coffee was hours cold. The light through the window had shifted from morning to afternoon. Dylan came downstairs at some point and saw me sitting there and said, "Mom, are you okay?" I said, "I'm fine, honey." He didn't believe me. He made me a sandwich. He put it on a plate with a napkin folded into a triangle, and I nearly broke right there. But I didn't, because I still had work to do. That evening, I started building the dossier. I opened a new spreadsheet. I labeled it with a date and a case number, the way I would for any forensic audit, because that's what this was now. This wasn't family drama. This was a case. Column A, date. Column B, amount. Column C, stated purpose. Column D, actual destination. Column E, evidence source. 2 weeks later, I had 27 pages and I was nowhere near done. It was during a routine audit for a client, a mid-size home health agency on the east side of Columbus, that I found it. I was reviewing Medicare billing records, checking CPT codes against patient visit logs, standard compliance work. And there, on line 412 of a billing spreadsheet, I saw my own Social Security number. I stopped breathing. I scrolled up. I scrolled down. I cross-referenced. Green Edge Outdoor Solutions had a subsidiary, a shell company called Comfort First Home Services, and Comfort First had been billing Medicare for home health visits, visits performed by a registered nurse, under my license number. My name, my credentials, my nursing license, the one hanging on my wall in the black frame. 2,847 phantom home care visits over 4 years. Patients who were never seen. Homes never visited. Care never provided. All billed to the federal government at rates that totaled $1.2 million. $1.2 million. I stood up from my desk. I walked to the bathroom. I closed the door and I put my hands on the sink, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I understood, for the first time, the actual scope of what had been done to me. This wasn't identity theft in the way people usually mean it. This wasn't someone skimming a credit card. This was my family building an entire criminal enterprise on the back of my name, my license, my career, my freedom. If the Office of Inspector General found this before I did, I would be the one investigated. I would be the one who lost my license. I would be the one facing federal charges. I was the signature on those billing records. I was the nurse of record. The burden of proof would be on me to demonstrate I had no knowledge, no involvement, no benefit. I had 90 days from the point of discovery to report it and establish myself as the victim. 90 days, or the investigation would assume I was the perpetrator. My hands were shaking when I left that bathroom. They didn't stop shaking for 3 days. I calculated it that week. All of it. Every payment, every transfer, every fraudulent account, every phantom billing. 22 years of giving. I sat at my kitchen table with the spreadsheet and I added the column, and the number at the bottom was $847,000 in direct transfers from my earnings to my family. That didn't include the $740,000 in fraudulent debt hung on my credit. That didn't include the $1.2 million in Medicare fraud. The total exposure, the total amount of my life that had been extracted, leveraged, or stolen was $1.94 million. I calculated it last Tuesday. In 22 years, I gave my family $847,000, and the only time anyone asked how I was doing was when they needed me to co-sign something else. That was the number. That was the weight of my silence measured in dollars. And dollars don't lie the way people do. Dollars just sit in a column and tell you exactly what happened. 2 days after I found the Medicare fraud, my mother called. I let the phone ring 3 times, watching her name on the screen, and then I picked up. Her voice was soft. The crying voice. Not the hard voice she used when she was managing things, but the wounded voice. The one she kept in a special drawer and only brought out when she needed me to feel like protecting her was my purpose on earth. "Heidi," she said, "I just want you to know you're my rock. I don't know what I'd do without you. You've always been so strong, so dependable. I've been thinking about you, and I just wanted to hear your voice." I said, "Thank you, Mom." My tone was level. She couldn't hear what was underneath it. She'd never been able to hear what was underneath because she'd never needed to listen. Listening wasn't part of the transaction. 3 days later, Angela called me. She was whispering. She said, "Heidi, your mom called a family meeting at the house. I wasn't supposed to tell you, but I was there, and I need you to hear this. Your mother told everyone. She told Jolene and Todd and your Uncle Robert and your Aunt Diane. She told them that you've become obsessive and paranoid since Mark died, that you're going through his finances and making accusations, and that everyone needs to be careful what they say around you because you're not well." Angela paused. Then she said, "I recorded it, Heidi. On my phone. I have the whole thing." I closed my eyes. I was sitting on the edge of my bed in the dark. Dylan was asleep down the hall. The house was silent except for the furnace clicking on. That low hum that used to be comforting and now sounded like the building breathing around me. My mother had called me her rock 72 hours before publicly calling me paranoid. The hug at Thanksgiving, the diamond bracelet winking in the light, the hand on my shoulder when I was 23 writing checks at the kitchen counter. That hug was a transaction. That warmth was a management strategy. Every "I love you," every "you're so strong," every "I don't know what I'd do without you" was a payment on a debt I didn't owe, made in a currency designed to keep me paying. I called Angela back the next morning and asked her to send me the recording. Then I called Craig. I hadn't spoken to my brother in over a year. My mother had told me he didn't want contact, that the rehab counselors said family interaction could trigger relapse. Another lie, a small one compared to the others, but the small ones cut differently because they didn't even need to be elaborate. They just counted on me not checking. Craig answered the phone and his voice was clear. Not the foggy, distant voice I remembered from his worst years. Clear and alert and a little confused. "Heidi?" he said. "Is everything okay?" I told him. Not all of it. Not yet, but enough. I told him about the mortgage payments. I told him about the rehab money. I told him I knew he was in Portland, that he was sober, that the money I sent for his treatment went to Todd's company. The line was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very softly, "I didn't know, Heidi. I didn't know they were using me like that. I've been clean for 2 years. I go to meetings. I build things. I had no idea." His voice broke on that last word, and I believed him. Not because I wanted to, but because I could hear it. The sound of someone discovering they've been a prop in someone else's lie. He knew that sound. I knew that sound. We were both learning it at the same time. Craig said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need you here. I need your bank records showing you never received that money, and I need you to sit in a room with me when I end this. He said, I'll book a flight tonight. But there was a moment. I have to be honest about this. There was a moment before that call when I almost didn't make it. I sat with the phone in my hand and I thought, what if Craig is still using? What if Mom sent him? What if this is another layer of it, another angle, and I'm about to hand my brother information he'll carry straight back to Jolene and Todd? I thought about that for 15 minutes. I weighed it. I tested it against what I knew, and then I decided that if I couldn't trust anyone, if every hand extended was a potential trap, then they had already won. They had already turned me into the paranoid woman my mother described. So I called him, and he was real, and he was mine. I hired an attorney, Catherine Webb, a white-collar crime specialist with an office on South High Street. I sat across from her desk and laid out the spreadsheet, the credit reports, the bank records, the Medicare billing data, all of it, and she listened without interrupting for 45 minutes. When I finished, she took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes and said, Heidi, this is one of the most comprehensive intrafamily fraud schemes I've seen in 20 years of practice. I said, I know. She said, we need to bring in the FBI. I said, I know that too. The agent assigned to the case was named Daniel Okafor, Financial Crimes Division. I met with him twice at Catherine's office. The second time, I brought the 140-page dossier I'd built. Cross-referenced billing codes with Todd's GPS data from the landscaping company's fleet tracker, which I'd accessed through a shared family phone plan nobody thought to remove me from. Matched every phantom Medicare visit to Todd's actual location, which was never within 50 miles of a patient's home. Correlated Jolene's bank deposits with the billing cycle for Comfort First Home Services. Mapped my mother's redirected payments month by month for 15 years. Agent Okafor set down his pen when I finished presenting and looked at me like I'd just handed him Christmas morning. He said, Ms. Holland, you've essentially done our investigation for us. I said that's because if I didn't, I'd be the one you'd be investigating. He understood. He stamped my file as cooperating witness, victim status, and the 90-day clock stopped ticking against me. I filed the federal fraud complaint. I froze every account connected to my stolen identity. I worked with Catherine to transfer my parents' house title, the one that had been paid off since 2009, with my money continuing to flow for 15 years after, into a protective trust controlled by Craig. I reported the Medicare scheme to the Office of Inspector General. I did all of this in 2 weeks while working full shifts at the hospital and making dinner for my son and checking his homework and keeping my face absolutely, perfectly neutral whenever Jolene texted me casual questions. How's Dylan? Did you see Mom's new curtains? Are you coming for Thanksgiving? I responded to every text. Same tone, same warmth, same Heidi. The mask fit perfectly because I'd been wearing it for 22 years. The only difference was that now I knew it was a mask. If you're still listening, and I think you are, then you know what's about to happen. And if this story is hitting close to home, if you're the one who always pays, who always answers, who always shows up, go ahead and hit subscribe because you need to hear how this ends. Craig flew in from Portland on a Thursday. He booked a red-eye, and I picked him up from John Glenn Airport at 6 in the morning. He looked different, thinner in the face but stronger. The way people look when the weight they've lost is the kind you can't measure in pounds. He had calluses on his hands from carpentry work, and a small scar on his left thumb, and he hugged me in the arrivals lane for a long time without saying anything. He smelled like coffee and cold air. I hadn't been hugged like that, without agenda, without a request hiding behind it, in longer than I could remember. We had 3 days before the meeting. I'd planned it for Sunday afternoon, a rented conference room at a business center on East Broad Street, downtown Columbus. I'd told my mother, Jolene, and Todd that I wanted to discuss a family financial plan. I said I'd been working with an advisor and I wanted to include everyone. My mother's response was immediate and enthusiastic. She said, "That's wonderful, Heidi. It's about time we all got organized." The eagerness in her voice had a flavor I recognized now. It was the eagerness of someone who sees a new revenue stream opening. Then, on Friday morning, Jolene called me. Her voice was strange. She said, "Heidi, did you know Craig is in Columbus?" I felt my chest tighten. She said, "I saw his flight on the airline account. We're all still on the same family plan. He booked a ticket to Columbus and he's here." I hadn't thought about the airline account. A shared rewards program my mother set up years ago. Every flight, every booking, visible to everyone on the plan. My pulse thumped in my ears. I said, "Oh, really? That's nice. Maybe he wants to surprise Mom." Jolene was quiet. I could hear her thinking. I could hear the suspicion forming, and I felt sweat on my palms. And the chair I was sitting in suddenly felt like it was made of something that could give way. She said, "It's just weird timing with your meeting on Sunday." I said, "You know Craig. He's unpredictable." She laughed a little, the polite laugh, and let it go. But I knew the window had narrowed. I called Catherine that afternoon and moved the meeting up to Saturday. One day earlier. One day less to prepare, but one day less for them to prepare too. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle around me, the furnace, the pipes, a car passing on the street outside. I thought about what I was about to do, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not satisfaction, grief. Deep, wide grief for the family I thought I had, for the mother who called me her rock, for the sister I used to share a bedroom with, for the version of myself who believed that giving everything was the same as being loved. That version of me was about to die in a conference room on East Broad Street, and I was the one holding the blade. But then I thought about Dylan, 14 years old, folding napkins into triangles, asking why his aunt only calls before rent is due. I thought about what I was teaching him by staying silent. I was teaching him that love means letting people take from you until there's nothing left. I was teaching him that being strong means never protecting yourself. I was not willing to teach him that. I got up at 5 in the morning. I showered. I dressed in the charcoal blazer I wear for depositions, the one that makes me feel like a professional rather than a daughter. I ate toast standing at the counter, and I drank my coffee black, and I looked at my nursing license on the wall. The black frame. 20 years. They had tried to use that license to commit a federal crime. They had tried to turn the thing I was most proud of into a weapon against me. And they had done it while telling me I was the strong one. I drove downtown. The conference room was on the 3rd floor. Long table, 8 chairs, a projector connected to my laptop, a window that looked out over East Broad Street where the Saturday traffic was light and the trees were just starting to turn. Catherine arrived first, set her briefcase on the table, and reviewed the presentation one more time. Agent Okafor came next in a navy suit, carrying a leather folder. He nodded at me. Nothing performative. Just acknowledgement. Craig was already there, sitting at the far end of the table with a manila envelope containing his bank records, proof that none of the rehab money ever reached him. I stood at the window and watched the street below. A woman walked past pushing a stroller. A man carried a bag of groceries. Normal Saturday. Normal lives. Up here, in this room, something was about to become very abnormal. They arrived together, which I expected. My mother walked in first, wearing a cream-colored blouse and her good earrings, the ones I realized now I had probably paid for, and she smiled when she saw me. That smile. 22 years of that smile, and I understood it now with a clarity that was almost medical in its precision. It was the smile of a woman greeting her primary income source. Jolene came in behind her, Todd a half step behind Jolene. Jolene was carrying a notebook. And I almost laughed because she'd actually brought a notebook to a family financial meeting, ready to take notes on how to get more of my money. Todd was wearing a polo shirt with the Green Edge logo on the breast pocket. He shook my hand. His palm was dry and his grip was confident, and I thought about the BMW X5 in my name that he'd been driving for 2 years. Then my mother saw Craig. Her face changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in that subtle way I'd learned to read over 45 years of being her daughter. The smile stayed on her mouth but left her eyes. She looked at me. She looked at Craig. She looked at the 2 people at the table she didn't recognize. She said, "Heidi, who are these people?" I said, "Sit down, Mom." She didn't sit. She stood there with her purse clutched against her side and something shifting behind her expression, some calculation running, some risk assessment happening in real time. Jolene sat down. Todd sat down. Craig didn't look up from the table. My mother stood for another 3 seconds and then she sat. I turned on the projector. The first slide was my credit report, all 12 pages of it, projected onto the screen behind me in font large enough to read from across the room. I let it sit there. I didn't say anything. I watched my mother's eyes move across the screen, and I watched the moment she recognized what she was looking at. I said, "Let me introduce everyone. This is Catherine Webb, my attorney. This is Special Agent Daniel Okafor, FBI Financial Crimes Division. And you all know Craig, although you may not have expected to see him, since you told me he was in rehab." The room changed. I could feel it change the way you feel barometric pressure drop before a storm. Todd's hand, the one resting on the table, went very still. Jolene's notebook slipped slightly in her grip. My mother's mouth opened and then closed. I walked them through it. Every slide, every number, every forged signature. I started with the HELOCs. I showed the security footage from the bank, my sister's hand moving across the signature line in blue ink. Jolene made a sound, a small wounded sound, and said, "Heidi, please." And I said, "I'm not finished." I showed the business credit line for Green Edge. I showed the car loan for the BMW. I showed the total fraudulent debt, $740,000. Todd leaned forward and opened his mouth, and I said, "Mr. Greer, I'm going to recommend you not speak until I'm done. Agent Okafor is taking notes." Todd closed his mouth. I moved to the mortgage, the $2,800 a month. I showed the transfer records. I showed the joint account. I showed the date the mortgage was paid off, March 2009. I showed 15 years of payments continuing after the debt was retired. I said $504,000. I let the number sit in the room the way you let a diagnosis sit with a patient. You don't rush it. You let them absorb it. My mother's face had lost all color. She looked like a woman watching a building she lived in catch fire, floor by floor, and realizing she was inside it. I moved to Craig. I showed the wire transfers. $45,000 for rehab that never happened. I turned to Craig and said, "Craig, would you like to share your records?" He opened the manila envelope. He set his bank statements on the table. He said in a voice that was steady and quiet, "I have been sober for 2 years. I work as a carpenter in Portland. I never received any of this money. I didn't know it was being sent in my name." Jolene started crying. Real crying this time, not the faucet-turning kind, the kind where the face crumbles and the breath comes in pieces. She said she didn't know about the rehab money. She didn't know about that part. Todd put his hand on her shoulder and she shook it off. Then I moved to the Medicare fraud. The room got quieter. I didn't think it was possible for a room to get quieter than it already was, but it did. Even the light from the window seemed to dim, as if the day itself was paying attention. I showed the shell company, Comfort First Home Services. I showed the billing records, 2,847 phantom home care visits. I showed my nursing license number, my social security number, embedded in the payroll. I showed the total, $1.2 million billed to the federal government under my name. I showed Todd's GPS data proving he was never within 50 miles of any patient address on the days those visits were billed. I said, "Todd, your landscaping company's accounts were seized this morning." Todd's face went white. Not pale. White. The blood left his face so completely that he looked like a photograph of himself. I said, "Jolene, your credit cards were declined at breakfast this morning. You may have noticed." Jolene looked at Todd. Todd looked at the table. I said, "Mom, the $2,800 stopped 60 days ago. I changed the automatic transfer. I wanted to see how long it would take you to notice." "You didn't notice, did you?" "You didn't notice because you were spending it faster than it arrived." My mother said my name. Just my name. Heidi. But the way she said it was different from any way she had ever said it before. It wasn't the summoning voice. It wasn't the praising voice. It wasn't the managing voice. It was the voice of someone who has just realized that the person sitting across from them is not who they thought. That the strong one, the reliable one, the one who always pays, has become something they have no script for. I said, "I'm going to tell you what's already happened, not what's going to happen, what has already happened, because you need to understand that this meeting is not a negotiation. It is a notification. I have filed a federal fraud complaint. Every account connected to my stolen identity has been frozen. The house in Westerville has been transferred into a protective trust controlled by Craig, because Craig is the only family member who didn't steal from me. The Medicare scheme has been reported to the Office of Inspector General. The investigation is active. Agent Okafor is here as a courtesy to ensure everyone in this room understands the legal gravity of what I have documented." Catherine said, "I'll add that Heidi's victim status has been formally established. Any suggestion that she was involved in or benefited from these schemes is not only false, but will be treated as witness tampering and obstruction." Agent Okafor looked at Todd. He said, "Mr. Greer, I'd recommend retaining an attorney before close of business today." Todd stood up. His chair scraped against the floor and the sound was sharp and ugly in that quiet room. He said, "This is insane. This is a family matter. You can't just come in here with the FBI like we're criminals." Agent Okafor said, "Mr. Greer, billing Medicare for services never rendered is a federal offense. The evidence suggests over $1 million in fraudulent claims. You are welcome to characterize this however you'd like, but I'd encourage you to do so with an attorney present." Todd sat back down. My mother spoke. Her voice was thin, the way fabric sounds when it's about to tear. She said, "Heidi, after everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" I looked at her. I looked at the diamond bracelet on her wrist, the one she wore to Mark's funeral, the one she wore to Thanksgiving dinner the year she told the entire table that Heidi doesn't need help. She's the strong one. She always has been. I looked at that bracelet and I knew exactly what it cost, because I had paid for it with 12-hour shifts and missed bedtimes, and a grief I never had time to feel because I was too busy being the strong one. I said, "Mom, what exactly have you done for me?" She didn't answer. She couldn't answer. Because there was no answer. There were 22 years of taking dressed up as 22 years of needing, and when you strip away the costumes, the crying phone calls and the heartfelt speeches and the hand on the shoulder and the words, my rock. What was left was a ledger, and the ledger was clear. I said, "I'm going to say something to you that I've never said before. I practiced it, which is a strange thing to admit, but I did. I practiced it in the car, alone, in the parking garage downstairs." I said, "I spent 22 years believing that helping this family was the same as being loved by this family. I was wrong. Helping was the price of admission. The moment I couldn't pay, or the moment I stopped paying, I would find out very quickly that love was never part of the transaction. I found out. It cost me $847,000, and my husband was dead, and my credit was destroyed, and my nursing license was used to commit a federal crime. And through all of that, through every single dollar and every single year. The only time anyone in this room asked how I was doing was when they needed me to co-sign something else. My mother's mouth trembled. Jolene was staring at the table. Todd was staring at the wall. Craig was staring at me, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen from a family member in so long I almost didn't recognize it. He saw me. Not the provider. Not the strong one. Me. The meeting ended. There was no dramatic exit. Catherine collected her files. Agent Okafor shook my hand and said he'd be in touch. Craig walked out with me. In the elevator, he said, "You did good, Heidi." That's all he said. It was enough. What followed unfolded over weeks, and I heard about some of it from Angela, some from Catherine, some from the silence itself. Todd's landscaping accounts remained seized. Green Edge Outdoor Solutions, the company that had been funded by my stolen identity, my brother's phantom rehab, and $1 million in fake Medicare claims, shut down within 10 days. His employees showed up on a Monday morning to a locked gate and a notice from the Department of Justice. Todd tried to open new accounts at 3 different banks. Each one ran his name and each one declined. His BMW was repossessed on a Wednesday. I know this because Jolene texted me that night, not to apologize, not to explain, but to tell me that Todd was sleeping on her parents' couch and to ask me if I was happy now. I didn't respond. I read the text once, and then I set the phone down, and I let the silence be my answer. Jolene's world contracted. Without Todd's income, fraudulent as it was, and without my monthly contributions flowing through my mother's joint account, her daily life hit walls she'd never encountered. Groceries on a budget. Gas calculated by the mile. The Kia Telluride payment due with no one else's credit to absorb it. She posted on Facebook a vague message about family being tested and God having a plan, and the comments were full of heart emojis and praying hands from people who had no idea what she'd done. But some people did know. Angela had talked. Not vindictively, not spreading gossip, just answering honestly when people asked why Heidi had hired a lawyer. The truth spread organically, the way it does in families, through side conversations and whispered phone calls, and the slow recalculation that happens when someone you thought was the villain turns out to be the victim. My mother tried to call me 11 times in the 2 weeks after the meeting. I let every call go to voicemail. The messages progressed in a pattern I recognized from the forensic literature on confronted manipulators. First came the outrage. "How dare you do this to your own mother?" Then came the rewriting. "You're confused, Heidi. You've twisted everything. None of this is what you think." Then came the bargaining. "Let's sit down. Just the 2 of us. No lawyers, no agents, just a mother and daughter, and talk this through like family." Then came the tears. "I'm your mother, Heidi. I gave you life. Doesn't that mean anything? I listened to each message once. I saved everyone. Catherine said they might be relevant. I saved them in a folder on my phone labeled Records, and I did not call back. The one that almost got to me was the last one." Her voice was small, and she said, "I just don't understand what I did wrong." And for a moment, just a moment, I felt the old pull, the reflex, the muscle memory of 22 years of being the one who fixes it, who explains it, who absorbs the pain and converts it into money and sends it to the people who need it. My hand hovered over the callback button, and I felt the weight of every habit I'd built pressing me toward that screen. Then I thought about the diamond bracelet. Then I thought about the joint account. Then I thought about 2,847 phantom visits billed under my name to the federal government. And I set the phone down and I went to make dinner for my son. Patricia stopped calling after the 3rd week. Angela told me later that she'd moved in with Jolene. The Westerville house, the one I'd paid $500,000 toward after it was already paid off, was now in a trust controlled by Craig. My mother had no legal standing to remain there. She was not evicted. Craig simply informed her, through Catherine's office, that the property was under new management and that occupancy terms would need to be formalized. She left before any terms were offered. I think she couldn't bear to stay in a house that now bore Craig's name instead of sitting invisibly under my financial umbrella. The OIG investigation moved forward. Catherine kept me updated. Todd was the primary target. Jolene was named as a co-conspirator. My mother was named as an accessory. My victim status held. The 140-page dossier did exactly what I built it to do. Every billing code matched. Every GPS coordinate confirmed. Every deposit aligned. I had built it the way I build everything, the way I learned in nursing school and refined in forensic auditing. Thorough, documented, inarguable. My nursing license was suspended for 60 days during the review period. 60 days where I could not work as a nurse. 60 days where I sat in my house in Clintonville and felt the absence of the thing that had defined me since I was 22. I looked at the empty spot on the wall where the frame had hung because they took the physical license as part of the evidentiary process, and that empty spot was a strange kind of wound. Not the worst wound, not even close, but a specific one. During those 60 days, Craig came back to Columbus twice. He brought his tools the second time and fixed the sagging porch step I'd been meaning to get to for a year. We didn't talk much while he worked. I sat on the porch with coffee and he measured and cut and hammered, and the rhythm of it was peaceful in a way that didn't require words. At one point he looked up and said, "You know, I never blamed you, right? For believing them about the rehab?" I said, "I know." He said, "Because I gave you plenty of real reasons to worry, back when things were bad. I just need you to know I understand why you believed them." I nodded. The understanding between us was a fragile thing, newly built, but it was built on something real, which was more than I could say for most of the things I'd built with the rest of my family. Dylan took it better than I expected. I told him a version of the truth calibrated for 14. I said some family members made bad financial decisions that affected us, and I'm handling it with a lawyer, and we're going to be okay. He said, "Is that why Aunt Jolene stopped calling?" I said yes. He was quiet for a minute, and then he said, "Good." I didn't ask him to explain. I didn't need to. He'd been watching longer than I realized. My license was reissued clean 11 weeks after the suspension. I received it in the mail on a Tuesday, in a plain brown envelope, and I held it in my hands in the kitchen and I cried. Not the controlled, swallowed crying I'd done in conference rooms and bathrooms and the front seats of parked cars. Real crying. The kind where your whole body participates and you can't stop it and you don't try. Dylan heard me and came downstairs and put his arm around my shoulders and said, "Is it back?" I said, "It's back." He said, "Good. Hang it up." I didn't hang it up. Not there. Not yet. I booked 2 plane tickets to Portland, one for me, one for Dylan. A direct flight from Columbus, 4 hours and change. I packed a single suitcase and I told Dylan to bring whatever he wanted, and he brought a backpack with his laptop and 2 books, and the flannel shirt that used to be Mark's. Portland was rain and green and strangers. No one on the street knew my name or my credit score or my nursing license number. No one needed me to co-sign anything. Craig met us at the airport in a truck that had sawdust on the dashboard and a coffee cup in the holder, and he drove us to a short-term rental he'd found in a neighborhood with good coffee shops and a park nearby. The first morning, I woke up at 6 out of habit. The rental was quiet. Gray light through the curtains. Rain on the window. Soft and steady. The kind of rain that doesn't demand anything from you. Dylan was still asleep. I made coffee in the small kitchen and I stood at the window and I watched the rain, and I realized that I had nowhere to be. No shift, no audit, no call to return, no check to write, no crisis to absorb. For the first time in longer than I can account for, the morning was mine. That afternoon, Craig took us to Washington Park. It's this expanse of green west of the city center, with old trees and trails and a view that goes on. We walked for a while, the three of us, and then we sat on a bench, and Craig went to get ice cream from a cart near the entrance. Dylan sat next to me. He had Mark's eyes, and he was taller than me now, and he held his ice cream cone with both hands the way he used to when he was small. I sat on that bench and I ate ice cream, and I realized I had never taken a vacation that wasn't someone else's emergency. I sat there, and I felt the bench under me and the cool air on my face, and the sweetness of vanilla on my tongue, and the warmth of my son beside me, and I thought, this is what peace feels like. Not the absence of pain, not the absence of memory, just the presence of a moment that belongs to me. A moment no one is going to bill for, or redirect, or forge my name on. My nursing license hangs in a new frame now. Not the old black one from the craft fair in German Village. A new frame, walnut, that Craig made in his workshop and shipped to me wrapped in brown paper. I hung it in the Portland apartment because we stayed. Dylan enrolled in school. I transferred my nursing credentials. I found a position at a clinic in Southeast Portland where the pace is human, and the patients know my first name, and nobody needs me to be the strong one. I checked my credit report last month. It's recovering. Slowly, the way honest things recover, one accurate entry at a time. The fraudulent accounts have been removed. The investigation continues. Todd was indicted in November. Jolene accepted a plea arrangement. My mother has not been charged yet, but the possibility remains open. I don't track it closely. Catherine sends me updates, and I read them, and I file them, and I move on. Jolene sent me a letter last month, handwritten, which surprised me. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't understand how it got so far. She said she missed me. I read it once. I didn't write back. Maybe I will someday. Maybe I won't. The point is that for the first time in my life, the choice is mine, and the timeline is mine, and no one is standing over my shoulder telling me what a strong person would do. If you're the one in your family who always pays, who always answers, who always shows up, check your credit report tonight. Not tomorrow, tonight. And ask yourself, when was the last time someone showed up for you without needing something in return? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear it. I used to believe that giving was the same as loving, that the more I gave, the more I was loved, that if I ever stopped giving, I would stop being necessary, and being necessary was the closest thing to being loved that I knew how to find. I was wrong. Love doesn't need a cosigner. Trust and generosity are different currencies, and one of them can be counterfeited. I learned the difference. It cost me $847,000 and 22 years and a nursing license and almost my freedom, but I learned it. According to the Federal Trade Commission, identity theft within families accounts for more than 30% of all identity fraud cases, largely because the victims trust the perpetrators and delay checking their records. The National Healthcare Anti-Fraud Association estimates that Medicare fraud costs the system over $68 billion annually, and family-operated schemes are among the hardest to detect because they exploit the silence of people who don't want to believe their own relatives are capable of theft. That's one story told. One nursing license framed in walnut, one spreadsheet with 140 pages, and one bench in Washington Park, where a mother and son ate ice cream in the rain. If you've ever been the strong one, the one who carries, the one who pays, the one who stays quiet because speaking up feels like betrayal, I hope you heard something in this that sounded familiar. And if you did, tell me about it. Drop a comment. Subscribe if you haven't. There are more stories coming. Stories about what happens when the people who hold everything together finally set it down.